Well, welcome back to another edition of Commodity Chat, powered by Trader PhD. I'm the head of market content, Dawson Schmidt. Joining me again, as always, Ag Market Advisor Nick Lawrence.
Hello, everyone.
Well, Nick, kind of starting off again. We're probably going to talk about a little bit about what's going on with the war in Iran or the current ceasefire. Last week we started with the fact that we entered the ceasefire with Iran. Maybe some traffic picked up in the Strait of Hormuz again with some shipping. That wasn't fully the case. And what do you got for the latest of what we've heard from the Trump administration as to what's kind of going on? Because there's been some interesting developments here lately.
Yeah, so last week, the markets generally, as far as our grains and energies are concerned, got a little bearish based off, the ceasefire agreement and then, the meeting that was to happen over the weekend to maybe put an end to this. Well, the meeting Saturday between, a very high level, right? Vance was there. Ended with both parties walking away with no real agreement either way. So that initially told the market that things were going to re-escalate. So we had knee-jerk reaction Sunday night, but that quickly got faded with the idea, or with no resumption of fighting. Right? There was no resumption of anything really kinetic. I mean, maybe there was a couple drones knocked down, but from Sunday through Monday, essentially, I think the market was like, okay, well, it's really still up until now. Maybe has the hope. Okay, well, just because it didn't come to any sort of rock solid agreement doesn't mean that the ceasefire is over. For now, it seems like both sides are mostly honoring that ceasefire with hopes that they could get back to the table, extend it, and maybe work, resolve their issues. So that's kind of where we're at right now. Oh, and then really after that meeting, the U.S. put a blockade of sorts to try and hold back anything coming in and out of the Iranian ports, but trying to open up a corridor for everyone else to move back and forth through. So there's been some mine-sweeping activities, those types of things. So there's potential progress.
Yeah. So, I mean, it sounds like with the blockade that the U.S. is trying to essentially just kind of put the chokehold on Iran a little bit. Some tankers have, that we've seen the reports of some tankers kind of doing some interesting stuff that are linked to Iran coming from their ports. And so the U.S. Navy or Trump is trying to kind of, restrict that a little bit to kind of get them to come to the table. And, a couple of the reports that came through is that just last night, we got news that 6 merchant ships turned around in the first 24 hours after the blockade had actually started.
Yep.
And then we have a couple of charts or a couple of graphics here. The one on the right I'll start with is four ships or 4 tankers transited through the Strait of Hormuz, and then they've just kind of stopped. They're sitting in the Gulf of Oman, and they are tankers that are somewhat sanctioned or directly sanctioned by the U.S. That are just kind of hanging out because, of course, after the blockade was announced, these are ships that are directly going to be impacted by what President Trump is trying to crack down on. And then another tanker with the image on the left is one that went through the strait, went down into the Gulf, and then just turned right back around to the strait again. And so it kind of seems like from what we're seeing here is that the blockade is kind of doing exactly what President Trump is trying to do. He's trying to restrict flow of Iranian ships without potentially restricting the flow of non-Iranian linked ships and keeping the strait open in some ways. I did see some headlines come through on the Bloomberg just saying that it sounds like Trump is in talks with India, or not India, with China. And, believe it or not, with what he's been saying, he did mention that, China's happy with what he's doing, essentially trying to keep a permanent opening of the corridor.
Mhm.
But it did seem like early on that some ships that were supposed to go to China were kind of impacted. Now, whether those got through or not, I can't remember, but kind of seems like, the relationship between the US and China with this is not necessarily fully impacted to where, both sides can still come to the table, pending Trump and Xi's meeting next month.
Yeah. We could parse out and talk about all the little posturing and commenting that just goes
Mhm.
back and forth on a 24-hour basis between all the parties involved. But um, and to no end. But anyway, for right now, positive signs that there's still light at the end of this tunnel potentially. So
Yeah. I mean, some more interesting developments with what's going on with the war, of course, is fertilizer. Our fertilizer prices have surged significantly. Not potash though, but just because you know, we get a lot of our potash from Canada, so we're not really being restricted of those flows or impacted on the global stage there. But phosphate prices and urea or nitrogen prices have really been surging. And we got news not too long ago that India was seeking a tender of 1.5 million metric tons of fertilizer or of urea from the global market. So there's kind of a lot of concern that this tender could really push prices up here in the short term because you know uh, those tenders are backed by government money. And so you now have at a height of a supply chain shock, government money being injected into this market. And I think some of those concerns were a little bit confirmed because we got news that there were some offers that were made for India's tenders. Specifically, about 3.3 tons of fertilizer were offered out of the 1.5 million tons that India was tendering for, and those offers came in between $959 to a little over $1,000 per ton for urea. And so, just for a little bit of perspective, they were getting offers at about $490 per ton before the war broke out. And so, we're seeing alone just these offers are being more than doubled post war breakout. So, I mean, there's kind of a little bit of a fear that the India's injection of their government money are not really going to help things decline down here.
yeah, yeah, the U.S. retailers, if they have product that's in position to be exported, um, they got an opportunity, to so that's what the individual producers bidding against, is that retailer saying, well, I can get more over here. It's a free market. See you later. And send that barge, or ship the other way. So that's what we're bidding against, and which brings us to some comments from Linville, from StoneX. Josh Linville, head of fertilizer at StoneX, is basically saying, "Hey, there's a lot of grumbling out there. Fertilizers, obviously aren't cheap, but it can get way worse, and without really taking advantage, quote unquote, taking advantage of their other clients." So, um, food for thought there. That fertilizer prices are on the rise. There are willing buyers out there at higher prices, and if you're in the business of making money, it's nice to have a product that people are continually bidding up for. So it could get worse.
Yeah. Yeah. Fertilizer's back in the crosshairs again, from what we can see with this tweet. President Trump came out and said that his administration are closely watching fertilizer prices, and that it will not accept price gouging. And yeah, to your point, I mean, Linville came out and said that, is there truly price gouging going on when we're seeing what we're seeing on the global market? And it seems like too, I mean, Bloomberg analyst Alexis Maxwell came out with this morning too, is that, she pretty much put out what you just said is that, urea's relative costs could get much worse for US farmers, unfortunately, because of this um, tender that India had just come out with, and it kind of seems to be moving things already. And on affordability basis, I mean, we're starting to see these crop to fertilizer ratios really surge up because, yes, corn prices are better than what they were, but fertilizer prices have been rising much faster, and so it's still taking a lot of bushels to pay for a ton of fertilizer. So yeah, I mean, we're seeing some things that we really need to get a little bit better scope on here moving forward to see, can we see a softening again.
Yeah, so I mean, ultimately to put a bow on this, obviously the sooner the conflict gets ended, the sooner some of this, I won't say ease quite yet, but at least stop going up. But every day that clicks off, that's just one more day supply isn't moving, and it's just one more day that it adds constraint. So when you add enough of those days up, we've got problems. So again, like, just continually to monitor, keep an eye, and make decisions as we move forward.
Yeah, trade has already been constricted, and now production has. So yeah, not only do we got to get trade going again, we got to get production going again to get things shipped. Moving on though, of course, this is what, third week now that we've been talking about wheat, but it just kind of seems to be driving. It keeps getting more and more important to be talking about, because I mean, you and I have been worried about the lack of moisture coming through the plains for hitting these HRW wheat areas, and these soil moisture deficits have not really gotten better for a lot of out in the plains. They've gotten a little bit better, but we're still having some problems with like SRW wheat country, and of course the southeast in general. I mean, does it seem like the market's worried about this because we have not seen these improvements, and with things that are forecasted to get rain, those have kind of been disappointing?
I think the market is worried about it. And again, not to keep we're not going to beat the same dead horse over and over. I just, we're continuing to talk about this because it's continually developing. And, based off the opinions that we gave you 2 weeks ago at this point, I just want to keep you guys up to date on, has that opinion changed? Has it not changed? How things are developing. All right. So, you know, one big item, just as far as wheat is concerned, was the last week's front, multiple fronts, I guess technically, but what last week's kind of weather that went through. We were on the edge of our seats, wondering, okay, well, like, some of that expand far enough east to cover some of these far western areas, and it just simply didn't. Right, basically a big whiff, and so your circle there on the left, I'm pretty sure none of that's really improved over the past week. Your circle to the right, not really improving. I think you see it in the wheat market, just like you have been for the past couple of weeks. I think you see this issue in the cotton market, right? The cotton market didn't like the previous WASI because of the increase in acres. Well, those increase in acres came from Texas, and look at a lot of Texas, right? And so those increase in acres, is it really going to matter on production? Not really looking that way. Plus, you've got sales picking up. We started at 70 some percent of last year's pace on when this marketing year started. We're up to like 98% roughly of last year's pace on cotton sales. So demand continually to incrementally improve over the past handful of months, plus new crop production risks, plus energy. You've got a cocktail there for what we see in the cotton market, and then you obviously see it in the wheat market. There's risk there, and then you put that with the potential for La Nina, El Nino to kind of hit right before, or for Australia, which can be hard on them as far as their production is concerned. and plus maybe a reduction in acres there anyway. You've got, I mean, again, continuing from the past couple of weeks, you've got a case that at least the market, um, at a minimum, should chop at least, right? At least an argument to be supported until more is known, whether we can actually trend higher and go make a new material high. So not looking good, bottom line, for this year's crop and potentially cotton.
Yeah. Yeah, the amount of area is still in drought for a lot of these areas. I mean, this is a wheat drought chart right here, but I guarantee you that cotton chart looks pretty similar. There, 90, I think it was 95% of U.S. cotton areas as of last week were under some sort of drought condition, and so we're needing to see a lot of relief in those areas. So I mean, to just kind of wrap up this discussion on wheat, I mean, you mentioned, is there condition for things to kind of trend higher? We're not too far from those highs um, that were posted earlier this month here, specifically for Kansas City wheat on this chart.
Yeah, solidly above the 200-day. Yes, volatility kind of picked up there, a month ago, and kind of once we broke out of our old consolidation range, things did kind of violently chop around. It could be quite a bit of producer selling, whatever, change of ownership, whatever all happened there. Things have been seemingly getting a little bit more organized. Yeah, again, last week we seem to be still coupled to crude, broke some support levels. But here, as of this week, we're kind of right back up on top of them, and we're right back into that consolidation range from 2 months ago, whatever, month or two ago. And I think I'm optimistic that the market could stay there for a while, while we at a minimum stay there for a while and kind of be supported in here.
Yeah, definitely some things to think about too. And for those that don't know, of course, we have our weekly weather interviews with Eric Snodgrass. We're watching a lot of these weather developments pretty closely here for the U.S., around the world, especially as we're predicted to, as of right now, see, I guess, record El Nino conditions here for the world. So going to be continue to watch that moving forward. But I think that'll wrap up our conversation for this week. Again, I'm Dawson Schmidt.
And I'm Nick Lawrence.
And this has been Commodity Chat from Trader PhD.